All right, and this is a process for making fig jam. You may be assigned to make a different jam that has similar procedures and concepts, maybe to using a different fruit. And so you can just substitute that out, and you may be asked to make a larger batch that has different amounts, but the concepts will be the same. All right, so quick review. I've got my screw bands and lids in a small saucepan off to the side, ready to heat up. Don't want those to heat up too early. Don't want the rubber to melt. A quick thing about the jars. These are all 8-ounce half-pint jars. You may be using these taller, standard size. You may be using these that are wide mouth. Okay, so they're 8 ounces. They got a difference. So long as you have matching lids and screw bands that go with each type, then you're going to be good. In my canner, off camera, I have my jars already starting to come to a boil, starting again with cold water. The recipe for a half batch is 4. I'm actually going to start with 5 jars because I'd like to have an extra jar in case there's a little bit extra jam and jelly, and I may borrow from a neighbor to make that all work out to make a 5th jar. Don't want to be struggling to get a jar at the end. Okay. Other ingredients to get together includes my sugar. Okay, so for this particular recipe, I'm needing 3.5 cups of sugar. It's a lot of sugar for just 4 jars of jelly, or jam I should say. But no matter what amount of sugar, you need to pull out half a cup, or an additional half cup for this one, okay, to add your pectin to. So I have 3 cups of sugar going to go in at some point, but I have a half cup more of sugar that I'm going to mix with pectin. So let's talk about pectin. Pectin is a product that's naturally found in apples, say, and I buy this in bulk, so it's not in the small little boxes like you might see in the store, but it's a thickener, okay? So this product is going to be added to our jam to help it to thicken. Now you can make thicker jams and jellies just by boiling and evaporating water out. Tend to find that that might lead to a burn product with lots of stirring going on. So we just use a pectin. It's not cheating, it's just the way that jams and jellies have been made for the long time. All right, so our scale unit, we want to get from grams to pounds to make sure we're on ounces, okay? And then don't forget, if you guys can see, it's at 0.25 ounce. So I hit tare, so it's at 0. All right, and the amount I need for this smaller batch is 1 ounce. Okay, so I'm not sure how many tablespoons that is. I just know that it's a certain amount by mass. So that was 1.06, it's 0.99. Still 0.99, 102, 2/100ths. Okay, so that is our pectin. So the pectin and the sugar mix together. All right, that half cup of sugar. And the reason why we do that is so that the pectin has a chance to dissolve better in the jam. Okay, so if I just threw in pectin by itself, when it hits that fruit, especially if it's hot, because we don't add this until later, it's going to clump up and not dissolve. So that's why this is done separately. So I'm done with the pectin. Put that over to the side. Another ingredient we're going to need is some water to kind of help thin out the mix. All right, so for this particular recipe, it's just a 1/4 cup. And then we also need some lemon juice. Okay, now for this recipe, it's asking for 2 tablespoons of lemon juice. And we use bottled lemon juice. I'm going to shake this up first because it has a consistent pH. And pH is just a way of measuring how acidic this is. The reason why we use lemon juice is twofold. Okay, 1, we're going to add lemon juice in here because the lemon juice actually helps the pectin, which we just talked about, set, okay, to make a thick gel. All right, but remember, we could make this without pectin just by boiling. So the more important reason for lemon juice is we are trying to bring the fig jam that we're making down below a certain pH, and that pH for us is 4.6. When we put our product, our jam, into a sealed jar, this now becomes anaerobic, without oxygen. And if there were botulism on our fruit, which exists in nature, it's not like a farmer did anything wrong, and we put it into an anaerobic environment, if the pH is not below 4.6, then botulism spores could grow, could end up getting someone sick. Ultimately, botulism could lead to death. Not very common, that's a very serious consequence. So the lemon juice can help our pH be just right. Okay, so we set that off to the side. Now, we had talked in the overview that we needed to have our tea kettle ready to go, which it is. In fact, it's just starting to whistle right now. Good timing. And I'm starting with 2 pounds of figs here, put on the scale. So I'm gonna turn off that. 2 pounds of figs I'm gonna start with. I'm gonna talk about how we're gonna process those. That is, we're gonna have ourselves a bowl. And our strainer, our colander, to put inside. And these figs were already rinsed once they got picked. But we're gonna put some boiling water over it to kind of rinse them again and also to soften the skin. Now the fig itself, if everything went well when these got picked, the stem is still attached, which is nice because then this is not exposed, okay, that the fruit is falling out. So you kind of want to take a look through and see that that's not exposed. The stem is off, but it's still kind of sealed. Because if you have some, and I may not, if I was gentle picking these that are totally ripped open, then we want to kind of pull those out right now, because when we put water over it, they're going to totally disintegrate. All right, so we'll put the water over this, let them soften. Don't forget to put a mitt on because the tea kettle itself, the handle is hot. Pour this over, just enough to cover. Okay, let those hang out for a few minutes, and then remember that ultimately we want water in here again, because we don't want to run out of water if we need it throughout the cooking process to cover the jars. So we're gonna let this hang out. I'm gonna refill this, and we're gonna pause the video and we'll come back. All right, we're back. I got my tea kettle filled up. I'll start getting that on low, and I'm ready to pull these figs out. There may be still steam coming off, but they're gonna cool off pretty quickly. So I want to drain these. Even though we're putting a additional amount of water in, I don't want these to be all waterlogged. People want to pay money for fruit, not water. But I'm going to go ahead and transfer these into a bowl. So the colander is all done. Okay, so I can set that off to the side. And my bowl that had the water in it, I can dump that out. Because the next thing we're going to do is cut up these figs to get processed. Okay, so it's real simple in the fact that I just want to take off the stem. All right, so if you see a stem up top, take that off. I can throw it into another bowl. Okay, if it doesn't have a stem, like say this one, then it just goes right into the bowl. All right, so I'm just processing these, taking all the stems off, moving them from one bowl to the other, and we'll finish that in time lapse. We have those all trimmed up. Now it's time to get them blended. So let's start talking about our stick blender and its safe uses. All right, so this is a stick blender, also known as an immersion blender. Okay. So being known as an immersion blender, this can get immersed in liquids. And when you put this in a liquid, you want to make sure it doesn't go above where my finger is showing, because the motor is above, and that could be a risk of electrocution. Okay. We also have a cord that sometimes is very, very long so that it can reach from a plug over into a stove. So you actually can use this on the stovetop for like doing soups, and we actually could puree our jam a little bit more if we saw chunks of fruit. But we're going to make sure you guys are aware of this style, that there is a low and a high speed. So once it's plugged in, low and high, it can turn itself on or be turned on. Okay, and we're going to go ahead and use a pitcher here to get vertical with it to blend that up. Now we're going to puree all of these, and there's an ultimate amount of fruit we're looking for, which is 2.5 cups. If we start with 2 pounds of figs, but we're going to blend this all up and then we'll measure it out. So plugging this in, and when we blend this up, you sometimes have to go up and down with it a little bit. All right, so when you're using a stick blender to blend up the fruit, just move the stick blender around, get yourself to the bottom, scraping the sides, maybe pick it up and look on the bottom to make sure that everything's getting pureed. Okay, and you're looking for a consistent mixing of the fruit. All right, so if you have a little bit of chunks of fruit that we find later on, it's not that big a deal, because as I said, this could be also done on the stovetop. So I'll go ahead and bang that out and unplug this. We may have to share this with someone, so we want to put it into a bowl so it doesn't make a mess on the counter. And we're gonna go ahead and measure out our fig puree. For this small amount, like we said, the smaller batch, we need 2.5 cups. The important thing is that you do not throw out any of this puree if you have extra, because some other group might be short. And so long as we have black mission figs going with black mission figs, sometimes we bring in green figs, sometimes we mix the two together, we can help out our neighbors. So 2.5 cups gonna get measured. All right, and we're back. We have measured out our 2.5 cups of figs, and using our scale and putting an empty measuring cup on top, seeing that it is at 0.26 ounces. Okay, so again, we start with 2 pounds of figs, but not all of it is used. Some of the stems get cut off. Okay, it's important that after we puree, we get the right amount, 2.5 cups. Okay, we're getting ready to start making our jam now. So our process is to get our saucepan and to add in our 2.5 cups of figs, all of it. Next, add in the water and the lemon juice. And it's at this point, so it gets cooked quite a bit, that I'm gonna add in that pectin and 1/2 cup of sugar. Okay, not all of the sugar, not all of the sugar at this point, just that 1/2 cup of sugar in the pectin, so this has a chance to dissolve and totally cook through. And then I'm gonna put this on the boil or on the stove on medium-high heat to try to bring it to a boil of what we call a true hard boil. And what I mean by hard boil is that this stuff is so thick, when it starts to heat up, it might bubble a little bit and you think it's boiling. It's so hot it would burn you, but if you stir it, that bubble goes away because it's not really at a true hard boil. It's just because it's so thick. So once this comes to a true hard boil, then when we stir it, we still see these bubbles coming up vigorously. That's when we're gonna add the rest of the sugar. So remember, there's a huge amount of sugar that is not added in yet, that comes later. So to start with, again, it's our fruit, the water, the lemon juice, okay, and our pectin and a small amount of sugar. Stirring this up, I don't really see any large chunks of fruit that have to hit again with the immersion blender, but I could certainly do it on the stove top. So we're gonna take this over to the stove, okay, and get ready to go. Now, we have our pot behind us that is already boiling, okay, with the jars inside. I'm gonna go ahead and get this position on the boiler that's closest to slide off to the countertop, because I'm doing my work over here. And while this is starting to come up to a boil, all my mess down here, all of this other stuff can all get washed and organized. And again, don't throw away any extra fig puree. You give it to a neighbor. All right, we'll come back to this when it's getting closer to boil. All right, it's been a couple minutes that this has been on, and let's talk about that true hard boil. So the camera may not show, but there's some bubbles starting to come up. And if I stir this, and it should be stirring it as it cooks so it doesn't burn on the bottom, the bubbles kind of go away. Okay, they're not still going. So even though it may look like it's boiling, it's not. It's actually in the looking like I'm in the 150s. Okay, so water boils at 212. This stuff is much thicker, so it's going to have a lower boiling point, but it's actually going to, when all the sugar is added, it's going to go well beyond 212. Well, we're going to stop at a minute past boiling later on, and that probably ends up being 220 on the thermometer, so that's past 212. But we're going to use that cold plate to make sure this got set up. All right, just like with candy making, our preferred tool for doing mixing of jam or jelly is wooden spoon, so it doesn't transfer heat as much. You want to stir this the entire time as it's cooking to make sure no fruit is burning on the bottom, and we're trying to get ourselves to what we call the true hard boil. All right, once we've covered our true hard boil, now we're going to add the rest of the sugar, and we're going to stir that in, being careful not to spill it over the side. It may take some time for the salt to dissolve. That is going to drop the temperature of this jam quite a bit, but we will just keep stirring that so it does not burn and get ourselves back to our true hard boil again. And we're back in real time. So this was in the 150s before I added the sugar. I added the sugars and started stirring it, saw it drop down to like 135 or so. Took about 5 minutes of cooking during time lapse. Okay, that we are back to what we say is a good true hard boil. And it is at this point, after 1 minute of the hard boil, that we'll be ready to do the cold plate test to make sure we have a proper gel.